Welcome to Get Wisdom Live with Carl Mollison and Brian Kelly. What if God was also a co-host? What if the historically rare ability to question God directly and get profound answers back has been rediscovered? What would God say to today's sophisticated but deeply troubled world? Get Wisdom Live is here to share those answers with you. Here is Carl Mollison and Brian Kelly. Another episode of Get Wisdom Live. I'm Brian Kelly, along with Get Wisdom founder and director, Carl Mollison. This month, Creator teaches more on soul attributes and soul maturity. This whole idea of soul maturity I don't think is one we've really explored in great detail. You know, people throw around the term old soul and young soul and baby soul all the time. But, we've never really turned the spotlight on that whole notion and taken a good look at it and gotten Creator's perspective on it, Carl.
No, and it's useful to expand knowledge when we can. There's always more to learn and more than we think we don't know that's out there kind of waiting for us to catch up. So we're coming from behind always in this life and in this world, this physical existence. So there's everything to be gained by seeking new information and a better understanding, because many times ignorance might be bliss, but it has danger.
Oh, yeah.
If we're missing something important and the clock is ticking, things can overtake us that are not in our interest. And so we need to be up to speed and on our game at all times as best we can.
Absolutely. Got a lot to cover, so we're going to get started right away. You asked Creator. Creator has previously revealed that the average human has already lived more than 400 lifetimes. We would have to imagine that the first life in the series looks radically different from the latest life. The terms old soul and young soul are thrown around a lot, but most people never give much thought to it. If one were to compare the full collection of lifetimes to a single human life, there would be newborn phase, toddler, adolescent, adult, and finally senior phases, which would all be marked by differing genders and degrees of acquired wisdom. Is it fair to say that the level of soul maturity becomes a soul attribute, quote unquote, in that the soul cannot exceed the limits of its growth? What is Creator's perspective?
All right, and this is what I channeled from Creator and Answer. These are Creator's words. This is an accurate interpretation of things as far as it goes, with the caveat that the soul is truly vast, and the experience obtained as a human being will still be a small portion of the whole, but yet highly relevant to all human life excursions as an incarnated physical human primarily. The purpose of existence is to learn and grow, to expand possibilities, break new ground, explore and create new paradigms. So everything that contributes to that overarching purpose of existence goes into the mix. The advancement in insight, in wisdom, in the understanding and depth of appreciation for the details and deeper meanings of things that accompanies maturity through hard-won life experience will begin to inform and build new muscles, in a sense, for many of the base soul attributes that were a part of the original soul configuration. So it is a certainty that nothing is static. Every newly minted soul that was created and ventured forth, at a minimum, has learned through that experience and growth in understanding more about what can happen, and that is the best teacher. So inevitability, it will help the soul-based being appreciate how they're doing with respect to their inner wherewithal, because they will either be satisfied or not with their particular makeup, at least that being expressed in the moment during a lifetime. Any perceived inadequacy or deficiency or weakness will be a subject of reflection and study and considerable planning prior to the next outing in the physical. In the meantime, all are a work in progress and developing as they go. It is true also that many times, because of the difficulties of the physical plane being so harsh and often working in opposition to growth and learning, will cause woundings and setbacks that may delay progress or even bring about a decline through corruption of soul attributes to either prevent their full expression through a kind of scarring analogous to that causing a loss of motion of the limbs, for example, after a major wound to muscles or bones broken that do not knit properly. Those defects can be repaired, but that can take more than a lifetime to accomplish. So the bad things can pile up and accumulate to the point where some souls are, in effect, moving backward through accumulating more trauma and consequential liabilities than gains. This is a challenge for all to take on. The maturity that results will ideally be a firmer foundation to mount further excursions and thus a richer and more rewarding future, eventually, once the temporary setbacks have been dealt with. So the soul is not static, but expanding and contracting in a sense with positive or negative influences experienced by beings directly, and then feeling the consequences for their function.
There's a lot to consider here. Creator is coming out and essentially affirming that souls essentially do mature and they're on a maturity trajectory, so to speak, as they learn lessons throughout life after life after life. But there's an embedded warning here too, in that because of trauma experienced, that maturity can become delayed or even become retrogressive. Even pull you backwards. And a lot of people who think alike in terms of a soul learning and progression don't take that into consideration. It's like, well, we're all moving towards greater and greater maturity, and some will move faster or slower, but we'll all get there. No, that's not necessarily the case, Carl. We may not all get there.
Yeah, that is true. There are beings that flame out in effect and give up. And this physical plane is one of the most difficult things that probably will ever exist. And we take it for granted because we're in it and it's normal to us, even though it is hard and people do struggle. But there is a lot of history here. And I was thinking, in hearing Creator's words once again, what Creator isn't taking time in this constrained setting to give a lot of backstory to the varied roles we've played, even before becoming human.
Right.
A lot of people are aware there are star seeds, beings from other star systems who do incarnate in our world, and they're here to help and so on. But one of the realities of that is that those star seeds are not coming from existing worlds anymore that are out there of benevolent beings.
Right.
They have been destroyed. They have been taken out as civilizations, and they've been biding their time in the light. Many of them have decided to incarnate as humans and essentially creating their own history as human beings, just as we are. This is a very new civilization. Humanity is very, very, very young. So most of us who are here are old souls. We've been around before, but mostly from worlds that have been savaged and destroyed. And that karma can influence who we are coming in yet again.
Absolutely.
So we're really, really coming from behind in a deeper sense than anyone imagines.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. You ask Creator, the soul profiles of helper, artist, athlete, researcher, orator, spiritual, and chief are important soul attribute combinations with the intended purpose to be of benefit towards reaching greater divine alignment. But what would that look like in terms of these roles? One source has suggested that each of these profiles can have a negative as well as a positive expression. For the helper, the positive expression is service and the negative is bondage. For the artist, the positive is creation and the negative is artifice. For the athlete, persuasion versus coercion. For the researcher, knowledge versus conjecture. For the orator, expression versus recitation. And for the spiritual soul profile, the positive is compassion versus zeal. And for the chief, it is leadership versus tyranny. So the suggestion is that there's a polarity with all of these roles, and that based on how much in divine alignment you are essentially might determine what side of the polarity you end up more on in terms of your growth trajectory. It is fair to say that the positive expressions of these profiles would be in divine alignment, and the negative ones, well, not so much. What is Creator's perspective?
All right, and Creator tells us as follows. This is a fair assumption and analysis to make, given the limits of your general description and categorization of things. In actuality, these soul profiles are major categories, but there are additional subcategories, and for such individuals, represent a unique, or at least more unique profile, better suited to match their experience and their goals for the life journey in the current incarnation, at least. As you come and go from life to life, you may explore wearing many hats, so to speak. This is part of learning and growth, to try things out, to try one's hand at various tasks and challenges. That is because life experience is the true teacher. This is why light beings spend little time, actually, I misquoted. This is why light beings spend little time on education as a pursuit detached from the flow of life and the many opportunities, activities, projects, and interactions that can be arranged, all of which provide learning and growth to make things happen and learn from the outcomes, much about who one is and what might be needed further to better achieve what one wishes to become. But within the categories of soul profile you are describing, it is quite true. There are a range of attribute expression levels and intensities that best suit a given profile and would be more of an obstacle or a hindrance in some way, perhaps, for those with a differing profile, either because they are not needed and the yearning to satisfy them would be a distraction, or because they become a real obstacle from being inappropriate in some basic way to be a preoccupation, or a tendency to turn to the wrong inner wherewithal to meet a challenge or responsibility. There are many ways that might come about, and this is what happens when people, for whatever reason, choose to pursue an activity or a career ill-suited to their soul profile, and they might find themselves a bull in a china shop, being too aggressive, too competitive. That might happen, for example, with someone who is an athlete with respect to soul profile, but wanting to be a helper and needing a nurturing side more than someone more inclined to want to take some kind of action and change things and perhaps pressure others through an impatience to make things happen and get ahead personally, being a person of action, so to speak, more than a tolerant, solicitous caregiver. But each soul profile that you describe involves a careful balancing of attributes so that people come into life with a basic wherewithal from their spectrum of attributes and levels of expression in order to be well equipped for the role. If something happens to corrupt major attributes needed, other more minor components that are unhindered may then create an imbalance, as with a chief profile suitable for leadership roles becoming corrupted, so that the person becomes too selfish, too enamored of having power, and begins to take advantage of their position to manipulate others and become a tyrant. So their skills that will help them have the strength and drive to take charge and command when appropriate can become excessive without inner balance to ensure there's a retention of a sense of fairness and concern for the rights of others and sensitivity to their needs, to not run roughshod over their concerns. That is a way to generate enemies and risk failure. So, as with all things, there is the need for balance. And even when this involves one's very makeup, their soul attributes and expression because of the complexity of sentient beings and the possibility of something going wrong through corruption or injury. When things go wrong and someone is thrown out of balance with regard to their soul attributes, it can have grave consequences through undermining their effectiveness and success in moving forward with their life mission and goals.
You know, one thing that immediately comes to mind would be like graffiti artists. You know, these are true art. You know, somebody that is indulging in graffiti in a very accomplished way. Let's say, you know, they're obviously very talented. They're almost certainly, you know, an artist, probably so profile. You know, more than likely. And you would think, you know, gee, how can an artist get themselves into trouble? Well, there's a way to do it right there. You know. Are you forcing your art on other people? Are you defacing somebody else's property? You know, so these soul profiles can be expressed in a negative way that can probably bring you more grief than joy if you're not careful.
Well, and this speaks to the need for personal responsibility, that we always have to keep an eye on the other party, on the other faction or position or competing interests in order to be fair and in order to fit in.
Yeah.
Because we're not a unitary being that has its own domain with no consequences for anything we might choose to do or not do. So we have to keep ourselves in check sometimes to not overdo things. There's so much competing opinions about how to be yourself.
Right.
And there are a lot of people who fall short in life because they never really exert themselves and assert themselves powerfully enough, and they become a shrinking violet and they give up too easily. But there are others who are too brash, overbearing, and assume too much about it being okay that they can do what they want because it suits them. And it might be their soul attributes that give them that wherewithal, and they're just going with it. And it seems natural for them. So this idea of balance comes up again and again and again. And it's so important to keep it in mind, because even with just being yourself, there is work to do. There is kind of a self-awareness needed to do it wisely and well.
Well, imagine trying to excuse Hitler by saying, well, he was just being himself, right? That's it's a bit much, but you know, there's a lot of people, you know, advocating that kind of position. So it's never as easy as it seems. Or actually, it should be. You ask Creator, when Creator labels a source as corrupted, could that be almost entirely a function of what is omitted and left out, as opposed to the attributes that are acted on being fundamentally harmful? Is it also a function of usage? For instance, would using a chisel as a screwdriver be considered a corruption of the tool and its primary function and purpose, especially if after having been used as a screwdriver, it no longer functions or functions properly as a chisel? Yet if one has an emergency need for a screwdriver and all one has is a chisel, can its use to solve the problem at hand still be considered corrupt? Where's Creator's perspective? So we're exploring the idea of corruption and misuse of attributes.
All right, Creator says, while at first glance this question might seem to be simplistic and too far removed from real life concerns, we think it is a good illustration in helping to understand how soul attribute imbalances may cause someone to rely on more problematical or ill-suited attributes to compensate in some way in order to get by. But in doing so, their work and actions may well be substandard and prone to errors because of inefficiency and the possibility of truly corrupting things in an unexpected way. Among tradespeople, it is a truism, and one of the first things one learns, to use the right tool for the job. And this nicely illustrates why not having the right tool carries risk and will likely lead to some level of harm taking place. In your example, that chisel with a fine knife-like edge when used more crudely as a screwdriver, may well be dulled or be chipped or dented, and therefore thereafter unable to make a nice smooth thin cut through wood to shave off a thin layer, which is a typical primary use for chisels. So if a situation happens one wonders about, where the primary desirable utilization of one's toolkit of soul attributes is not possible, there will inevitably be a lesser performance and outcome. If the deviation is at all significant, it will be noticed and that fact recorded in the Akashic records as a misstep, a kind of error for which there was a consequence that caused harm in some way, if only to the self and not others who might depend on the individual in question trying to compensate for not having the best equipment for the job. As you have come to learn in your many probings and questions of us about the workings of karma, it is indeed a very discriminating and accurate analyzer of all things good, bad, or in between. It will see the deficits. It will see the inadequacies. It will see the risk-taking that puts someone in harm's way, whether or not serious harm results. While it is true that perfection is unreachable, given you are not comprised of the totality of the divine, but a portion, all of life is, in a sense, an exercise in divinity to learn and grow in ways to expand, while ideally being in divine alignment at all times. And when one is less so, there will be a demand by the law of karma to make amends. You will not get away with errors of judgment, lack of skill, or selfish choices that cause harm. So what this means is it is important to take one's role seriously, to not only do one's best, but to look for ways to expand on what is possible. So what is best today may get better tomorrow. Anything that takes away from that goal represents a healing need to bring things back into better balance and not simply compensate for lesser capability, but to rebuild what has been lost or inadequately expressed to become something greater than before.
So the motive behind this question was, again, we're talking about soul attributes, and we're learning that a lot of the soul attributes are developed, put in place, chosen, or given long before we're incarnated in this life. And that's essentially our toolkit that we come into our life with. And that toolkit is probably going to be a unique collection of tools. So I might have a screwdriver, but Carl has the chisel, you know. And part of, I think, the challenge of life is to not only live our own life, our own best life, but to live it while Carl's living his best life. And we have to work out a way that we can both live our best lives and then make the sum bigger than the whole, so to speak, right? So it's a challenge of you've been given a certain tool set. And that tool set you've been given is not something you can just throw away and go get another tool set in the middle of a lifetime, unfortunately. It doesn't. I don't believe attributes work that way. So if you're going to express your attribute, you're going to end up expressing it either positively or negatively. And even if you try to get away from the attribute, you're going to try to get away from it in line with the attribute. Essentially, you're going to misexpress that attribute. So you're kind of stuck with your attributes, and your mission is to try to use them in a positive way, the most constructive way possible.
Yeah, and another point I would add that will be touched on again and again as we do these things is that things change. And we are adapting and growing and evolving and expanding all the time. And among these 400 or so lives we've lived, we have had different ranges of attributes among those lifetimes. We're not the exact same being coming back over and over and over so that eventually we get it right. And then everything runs smoothly, or should, because we were experienced in doing things and always pretty much the same way. That doesn't work that way. We're bigger and more than that. And so we do take on challenges and new tasks and new opportunities. And so we're learning how to use soul attributes as we go. So maybe we have one we haven't really had to rely on for a number of lives, but in this life, it's very, very important. So this gives us a chance to take it out for a spin and get to know it and get to live with it and learn the rules that it implies, and not doing something to excess or underutilizing it. So that's a part two. This is a learning journey.
Absolutely. You ask Creator, there is material on soul attributes from other sources that seems quite comprehensive and internally consistent. Yet it provides nothing in the way of helping to heal dilemmas that arise. It's one thing to say that the positive expression for a helper is service while the negative is bondage. That might offer insight about such a person at a deeper level, but does not provide a means to really assist anyone with a helper profile, or any profile for that matter, to navigate away from bondage to service. It's funny how after reading this material, one feels more equipped and yet still entirely helpless to change anything for the better. Do such sources helping us feel more equipped, but in fact helpless, serve a dark agenda? Is this an attempt to weaponize divine truth? What can Creator tell us?
All right, and this is what Creator says. What you are seeing here is that despite all of the divine wisdom that is your legacy as a soul-based being, representing an actual extension of our consciousness, and thus divine by definition, things are far from our ideal in the physical world you inhabit. And that is a reflection of your galaxy as a whole, because of the rise of evil corrupting things. What has happened through the ages is that people have reached out to us for help and support, and we have done our best to do so without interfering directly by taking charge and leading, but instead letting people make their own way, their own choices and decisions, and only acting as advisors through inspiration in a very subtle way. So they still must choose to follow something more divine or ignore our suggestions. When people turn away from their belief in us and their faith becomes undermined, it drives us away, because we not only cannot lead under the best of circumstances, it is truly impossible to provide high-level help for someone who does not acknowledge our existence, and thus will never ask us to be involved in their lives directly. In fact, many atheists have a quite hostile attitude to anything spiritual. With the erosion of faith as a general trend of long-standing, it has become easier and easier for interlopers to corrupt thoughts and beliefs of individuals, to lead them astray, and to weaken their ability to summon divine assistance. One of the signs of this is the advent of the New Age movement, a kind of do-it-yourself spirituality, encouraging people to believe they are light beings on a physical adventure, but it is more like a vacation, and there is nothing in particular they need to do but find ways to enjoy themselves and rely on their own inner thoughts and feelings to navigate and make things happen. That is all well and good in a world that is normal and people know fully who they are and what they are able to do and what might need divine assistance. When people act solely on their own, they are at a tremendous disadvantage, because no one in the physical has a high degree of divine power. And there are times when you need divine assistance on your behalf to stand up to the darkness, to save the day. And without it, you might perish. There is an active disinformation campaign ongoing, and has been through the ages, to discourage all things spiritual. And this rise of the secular movement has greatly disempowered humanity. This has shown up in every sphere of human endeavor, and no less when it comes to the waning spiritual impulses that arise from time to time. The New Age approach is to simply will things to happen through one's consciousness, with vague encouragement to co-create a reality with the universe, and such teachings that in effect mean a person will be entirely on their own. Unless we are asked directly, as the creator of all it is, we cannot get involved in any way, and your fate will be in your hands alone. The many would-be spiritual gurus and teachers who have come along, including many would-be prophets, having such gifts, but not utilizing them in safe ways, are easily misled and corrupted by interlopers to embrace false teachings. And that is done across the board with psychics and psychic mediums and anyone with intuitive ability involved directly or indirectly with spiritual practices and concerns. So, this body of knowledge, talking about soul profiles and soul attributes done by others, you have referenced in your question, has been distorted through manipulation to be incomplete. The interlopers view religion as a kind of folly and welcome religious practice for the most part because it creates a distraction and as a feel-good exercise helps people be complacent, which they need to happen while they abuse you from behind the scenes. So religions and anything connected to spiritual perspectives have been heavily manipulated and corrupted to generate dogma and rituals that are feel-good exercises, but typically of little value in making anything important happen. And that is why even the awareness of soul attributes and their importance goes just so far in describing basic characteristics, because in the absence of an understanding of the implications for well-being, when things are out of balance and the wrong attributes are overemphasized, it will get people into trouble. The quite varied array of spiritual practices and approaches, by and large, are wholly inadequate in offering robust ways to help people heal. And healing is the number one need holding humanity back and keeping you at risk. You have been weakened to the point where your annihilation would be straightforward and a relatively simple matter. Human beings are not only ignorant about the threat living among them and actually running the world from behind the scenes in the form of malevolent extraterrestrial races in a dark extraterrestrial alliance, but you have been manipulated through mind control to be complacent and thus become sitting ducks, oblivious to the coming slaughter. So the gradual disappearance of spirituality as a priority of focus is not because humanity is becoming more sophisticated and too smart to value folklore and superstition, but rather is a symptom of a sophisticated, high-level manipulation, corrupting and undermining your belief in the divine realm, which is the only thing that can save you.
Well, there it is, the word sophisticated, high level manipulation, corrupting. We are, being taken to task by very advanced beings in terms of knowledge, in terms of experience, and in terms of their ability to corrupt. So, people underestimate, the sophistication of our opponents. But I think this answer really tells us that we should not be complacent in that regard. That even material that appears helpful, like soul attribute information, if it's out of context, it can be a distraction. It can send you down a dead end path because you end up, essentially learning more and going, that's interesting, but you don't have tools for healing, Carl.
Well, and this is what the divine is for, to sometimes give us a nudge or a kind of inner inkling about something, a little bit of inspiration and gentle guidance in the form of offering an alternative, not to force it on us, but just to remind us there is something else maybe we should look at. And then it's up to us to make our choices. Well, even when it comes to spirituality, what this particular question and answer is pointing out, we're not doing so well.
Yeah.
And using our soul attributes
Right.
that are God-given and God-based. We're literally an extension of the divine. Creator has said it in this series today of questions and answers. So if we're not getting the point and we're not acting on it, something is really wrong.
Oh, yeah.
So this is a wake-up call, and it couldn't be more stark than to bring up the possibility of our destruction through that complacency when we're being pressured and menaced and don't know it.
Agreed. And, Get Wisdom is going on its 8th year, I think. And we're just now really starting to explore soul attributes in more detail. But I think that's also a message of its importance, right? In the sense that this didn't come right out the gate. This wasn't the first thing Creator talked about, because it's not necessarily the most important thing. This is an advanced look at some of the nuances behind who we are and how this ultimately the Lightworker Healing Protocol can work to heal them. But it's the Lightworker Healing Protocol that is much more important to comprehend and grasp than the soul attributes, which is a supportive of the soul. So it is what we are, but it's more important to know healing than it is to just know the construction, so to speak. But the construction is important, because if we understand it deeper and more meaningfully, then we can be more effective practitioners of the Lightworker Healing Protocol. I believe that. But if you try to give an algebra lesson to a kindergartner, you're not going to accomplish much, Carl.
Well, and this speaks to why it is we're in the state of being that we are, where we're still struggling so, and our world is still quite a mess. Science would say, well, we're evolving, and that's sort of like a cop-out. It's sort of like a made-up explanation for why things are messy, why they're incomplete. And it doesn't seem to comport with a loving God out there who could make everything perfect, and it's so clearly not.
Right.
But we're missing the point of this object lesson, which is perfection is for us to strive for. Yes. And to bring about the best semblance we can. Yes. So if we're sitting around waiting for evolution to do it, we're disempowered. You might as well not even be here, because you're not doing anything to help yourself.
And this idea that we're all evolving, Creator has put a torpedo through that, because Creator says some of us are devolving.
Yes.
So it's not universal. It's not universal by a long shot.
We're not using our wherewithal.
No.
Much of the time.
Yeah. But we're here to try to help us, encourage us along that path. That's what our mission is. You ask Creator, are these soul attributes present among the extraterrestrial species? Are there helper Anunnaki and researcher reptilians? Are they all expressing the negative poles of their soul profiles? Are all the athlete Arcturians coercive rather than persuasive? And of course, would persuasion used for dark purposes really be coercion in the final analysis? What can Creator tell us about the soul profiles of the extraterrestrials?
All right, this is what Creator says. That would take an encyclopedia, I think, to answer each one of those points. But this is what Creator says.
I'm sure it would.
Given the awareness of time constraints, I'm sure. One of the reasons that this discussion is inherently useful is that it not only describes human nature, at least in a fundamental overview of its makeup and the ways in which there is variety in the types of people you will encounter, but this is dealing with the nature of life itself, and therefore reality in its component parts. You have been given a corrupted view of things by your science in thinking of the universe as a kind of random series of events with no particular purpose or destiny, when the opposite is the case. When things go wrong and become corrupted, to become less balanced and effective, that can worsen and become a downward spiral, and in fact end with the recall and reconfiguration of the entire universe unless things can be turned around. The rise of evil is through beings not expressing the loftier and most divine attributes of their makeup. The extraterrestrials are much like human beings with regard to having similar souls and an array of attributes whose combinations give rise to their personality and the makeup of their character. They have become quite abnormal because the corruption has worsened and worsened over time to the point where they are now functional psychopaths, unable to experience love or compassion, being totally selfish and self-serving. Their primary motivation is to seek personal power over others, being the only way they can achieve personal security. That is a dog-eat-dog existence, quite empty in the absence of love. This is why you were created, to solve the problem of evil, being fresh from the light in comparison to the ancient civilizations of the extraterrestrial predators in your midst. You still have the capability to interact with us and summon our assistance and have a desire for things to improve and are capable of feeling compassion and even love for fellow beings, as perverse and corrupt as the interlopers have become. Because you can identify with anyone who suffers in knowing they are in the grip of something they cannot control and will ultimately pay a heavy price.
I actually found this answer very encouraging because basically it suggests that we actually have a lot in common with the extraterrestrials. They are soul-based beings. They're psychopaths. They've fall from a field, but they had a common origin and they have common soul attributes, essentially. Almost all of them are probably being expressed negatively now, but the foundation is still there and there's a path back. But we have to do our part to save ourselves first before we can ultimately save them, Carl.
Well, and I agree with you that as grim as it sounds, the fact that this can be identified, put on the agenda, and with divine help turned around and healed is the greatest news one could ever receive. Because what more could you possibly want than for your tormentor, your enemy, to somehow end up being your friend one day? That's a way out as well as a way forward. So we're in good hands with the divine in guiding us, but we've got to pay attention. We've got to do the work.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You ask Creator, do the angelics have similar soul profiles? If not, can Creator provide a simple summary of the difference or explanation as to why not?
All right, Creator says, the angelics have some similarities, but also some differences from humans and other soul-based beings, but overall are more alike than different. The differences are more about the intended roles they are to play. And so the makeup of attributes will have a different kind of distribution. The angelics were created to be helpers and assistants to all the beings and creations in whatever dimension one examines. As such, you outrank them in ultimate capabilities, not as a physical human, but as a light being expression of humanity. But as sentient beings, the angelics have great complexity and great wherewithal to carry out many complex maneuvers and handle many heavy responsibilities for the care and assistance of other beings, especially when things go wrong and a divine hand is needed. The common connecting thread of all beings everywhere is that all are a part of our consciousness and thus are imbued with a divine nature. The fact that there has been a rise of evil in your midst is not because we are evil, and that is what they are choosing to follow, but it is a consequence of an imbalance of otherwise useful soul attributes and suppression of key capabilities that constitute the ultimate expression of divinity, such as being loving and able to both give and receive love in a balanced way, being the most powerful force of the universe. When love is absent, everything else will suffer because love is the source of goodness and everything else that is positive and of value. Even those things that can get out of hand and used for evil ends, such as aggression, when tempered with love, can turn a being into a powerful champion for love and light. The corruption through becoming too self serving has led to the downfall within the angelics to become spirit meddlers, the so called demons of the Bible, who prey on the living and promote wrongdoing and evil behaviors, because that will be what is left when love and its influence is taken away. So the angelics are normally of great service to humanity and to the extraterrestrial civilizations as well, because they have many soul attributes in common. The ultimate being the capacity for love, and conversely, all beings, whether human, angelic, or extraterrestrial, when corrupted by evil, will suffer from that reduction of divinity and become a threat to others.
I read this answer and I hear it again as you're reading it. And I think to myself, just wow, there is so much here. But I think the most important insight is where Creator says, we didn't create anybody to be evil. Instead, we gave them soul attributes that, in certain contexts, can be very powerful tools that get imbalanced. And that is the rise of evil. It's basically the imbalance of soul attributes. I think that's an important insight.
Well, and it also explains mechanistically, although at a kind of simple level, which is where we're at, being still kind of in kindergarten here, the answer is healing and
Yes.
restoration. It's not that we've got to sort of somehow create the impossible and make something happen out of nothing. It's all within us and it's all workable.
Yes.
And that is a tremendous encouragement and an insight we can take to the bank and count on for our future.
Absolutely. You asked Creator, the term arrested development means that for all practical purposes, growth has stopped and no more forward progress is being made. Does this describe the state of nearly all or all of the extraterrestrials? It's widely understood in self-help circles that no progress can be made until one admits to themselves that they have a problem. Many of the extraterrestrials, have any of the extraterrestrials even made that minimal mental leap? Have any of them had the passing thought, I don't think things should be this way? What can Creator tell us?
All right, Creator says, it is true that the physical extraterrestrials in your galaxy have become corrupted and lost their way, and in that sense, exhibit arrested development and, in fact, a retrograde progression through loss of divine alignment. As such, they are relatively hapless, not understanding they are on a dark path that will lead to oblivion eventually, unless you can save them through healing. There are a few among them who retain enough inner sensitivity to realize things are not fair in their worlds and yearn for something better, but none have the knowledge or wherewithal to find a path back to belief in the divine and a reawakening of awareness of their own divinity and what that is like and can accomplish. As we send him our words, your channel is thinking about the phrase amputated spirit, being an apt description of the plight of the extraterrestrials and their dark spirit helpers they commandeer to carry out their dark campaign of subjugation and enslavement of humanity. It is really an amputation of divinity as a core makeup set of capabilities and potentials. We are working to help encourage any of their membership who have a glimmer of awareness of something being missing to examine more carefully what that might mean for them personally and help prepare them to be more in alignment, to receive divine healing as part of what will be an extensive and quite long-term recovery that will be needed to reverse all of the lost wherewithal that has so diminished the extraterrestrials with respect to their soul attribute makeup and level of expression being so imbalanced and some things all but extinguished.
I think this is another really, really important revelation from Creator. Creator talks about them being loveless all the time. And when we think in terms of love less, we think of no love whatsoever, but less really just means small quantity or lesser quantity than something in comparison to others. None of us have the opinion that the extraterrestrials are loving in any way, shape, or form. However, Creator was very careful to use the word sensitivity, and that at least some of them anyway still have the passing thought that, things kind of suck down here and shouldn't be this way. Things seems like things should be different and maybe could be, and you got to start somewhere, or on the other side, you can't lose everything. Otherwise, they'll be a complete lost cause, right? And they're not, because we can still save them. They're not beyond saving yet. So there's still something there, not much, and it's fading fast, which is why we have to get going, Carl. But, I'm still encouraged that there's still something there. Ain't much, but there's something.
Well, there's a long ways to go, I think, with the awakening that we're a part of, like it or not. But this is an important aspect to help the world learn and grow and not be ignoring the things that are so very important that they're ignoring now.
Yeah.
And one thing that comes to mind in view of this last answer is that we're always seeing bad actors in the world, and they're in the news, and they're at national levels or regional levels or local levels or personal levels. And it's always kind of like an abstract discussion about the law and who did what to whom and who started it and all that sort of mundane level of conflict and conflict resolution. And no one talks about what's missing is their divinity.
Yeah.
and that's so very fundamental, and that's the case Creator is building here. Absolutely. That what makes someone evil is they're out of touch with their divinity. It's that simple and that important and that meaningful. But it also points to the way back. We've got to start thinking in those terms and making it clear that is the eventual way to win.
Well, this is a call to action, and Creator said in an earlier channeling in this show that some people, think that this is just a vacation and, make the best of it. And I have friends that think that way. I might be seeing one this week, to be honest with you, that life goes to whoever has the most fun wins, and we're learning that is not the case. There's an important mission that all of us have. So we got to keep that in mind. You ask Creator, it seems a lot of human behavior can be understood by discerning how old or mature the soul truly is. One source suggests a motto can be attributed to each level of age. Newborn souls would have the motto, "Let's not do it." Toddler souls would have the motto, "Do it the right way," with the right way being whatever it was taught as a child. We all know people like that. The adolescent soul motto would be, "Do it my way," believing their way to always be the best way, whatever it is. The adult's motto would be, "Do it anywhere but here." And the senior's motto would be, "You do what you want, and I'll do what I want." These mottos can be quite revealing and even useful in choosing successful strategies for dealing with different people. What is Creator's perspective?
Creator says, we do see some relevance here in the characterization you describe. In a general way, there is a parallel in considering the development of an individual going through various stages of chronological age progression and their growth and maturation and becoming adjusted to life in the physical and exercising and flexing their soul attribute muscles, so to speak. What we would say is, rather than this model representing narrow perspectives of beings at various stages on the way to maturity and soul growth with depth and meaning, what has happened to the extraterrestrials and dark spirits as well has been not an arrested development so much as a degradation and a loss of flexibility through the diminishment of soul attributes as a function of disuse and corruption. So the earliest of the extraterrestrial civilizations, in effect, started out at a high level. And while as individual beings, there was growth and learning in the course of a lifetime, analogous to the progressions you are modeling here relative to stages of life of human beings, their civilization as a whole has become diminished. And that in turn has undermined what is possible for an individual extraterrestrial to achieve and experience, no matter how long they live during an incarnation. The same is true for humans as a part of their culture, that a tyrannical government, the devaluation of spiritual pursuits, and growing insensitivity to the plight of others will lead to a severely restricted set of possibilities, a diminished life devoid of deep satisfaction and enjoyment. So, in the case of extraterrestrials, the distinction among varied stages of life experience would have to be expressed in much harsher degrees of intensity and levels of perversity, in fact, as being characteristic and to be expected.
Well, that last sentence is wow. In other words, if you look at the progression of the ETs, the older quote unquote ETs are just more perverse and more skilled at perversion, skilled at what they can get away with and how they can exploit. So they are advancing, but along a very dark path and not necessarily getting any closer to the divine. They're certainly not. They're getting farther and farther away from it. So they're progressing, but down the wrong way road, Carl.
Yes, yes. I was having a flashback as I was reading this to going to an international film festival back in the 1960s, late 1960s, and an award-winning short film was a cartoon, and it was a simple line drawing, and it lasted about a minute at most. And it was so powerful, and it's obviously stuck with me all these years. And it showed the birth of an infant, this little baby,
Mm-hmm.
and then the baby becoming a toddler, and then becoming a child, and starting to have more outline of maturity. This is just a line drawing.
Right.
And then going out in the world and moving about and running and jumping and doing things, and then becoming an adult and becoming more staid and more purposeful and more focused and workmanlike and getting into routines and so on. But then with aging, starting to slow and then starting to shrink, even getting stooped over and starting to just shuffle along and then become thin and almost skeletal, and then ending up in bed, curled up in a fetal position. And superimposed over it is the image of that starting point as infant. It's like a cycle
Right.
of maturation and dematuration, in effect, in terms of capability. And now you're applying this through your question, and Creator is pointing out that applies to civilizations as a whole, and what can happen if you can't conquer adversity.
Yeah, no. Your analogy reminds me of a much simpler analogy. It's kind of dark. It's like we enter this world with wearing diapers and drooling, and we leave this world wearing diapers and drooling.
Well, that's a shortcut to the same metaphor.
But we've heard from Creator on that, and Creator says no. Old age shouldn't necessarily be a devolution in that way. That you shouldn't wear out completely before your time, and it's probably better to go out as a light bulb does all at once. Your maximum brightness is there until it's gone, and that's probably the intent for how we should live our lives, and not just devolve into a vegetable state.
Well, we have a lot corrupting us,
We
and
do, yes.
that is the reason it's
That
not a
is
smooth course, and it
exactly.
gets and it falls apart all too often.
And with the healing, we're much more likely to be the light bulb that will be bright until the very end than
Yes.
without the healing. So that's a powerful thing to keep in mind. U.S. creator, one source says the aggregate soul of humanity on Earth is adolescent. Getting at the notion of corruption, the source has this to say about the human condition. As civilization ages with the soul age of this planet, so solutions to the human condition will emerge as the average soul age level rises. Civilization will become primarily philosophical. The soul, like the body, must develop within set limits. There is no express lane to human understanding, unquote. In other words, I kind of saw this as relax, all in good time, nothing to worry about. You'll progress, you'll get there eventually. And meanwhile, aliens in quote unquote arrested development are plotting to annihilate humanity, Carl. What is creator's perspective?
All right, creator says, we see the perspective in the quotation you have given as more evidence of complacency than any deep understanding of the present realities and their meaning for your future and possible lack of it. Time is running out, in fact, for you to save yourselves. What this quotation fails to address is that the entire issue of your destiny is not one of self determination. Your future has already been co opted and controlled by interlopers, and it is they who dictate who you are allowed to be and what you are allowed to do with your energies to a very large extent. So, this philosophical conjecture about the evolution of civilization over great spans of time presupposes, logically, that a great deal more time will be needed given the sorry state of affairs of the current civilization after the already quite long period of time just to get this far. So the fact much change is needed before the world resembles something ideal, being far from it currently, makes it a seemingly safe assumption there will be a quite long haul involved in reaching that distant day when humans have risen above their petty concerns and evil, selfish impulses to enable people to work together smoothly and efficiently for the greater good of all in harmony and peace. The reality is, such goals are an inherent part of who you are as spiritual beings and would be sought naturally, all other things being equal. The fact you are living in a slave colony changes everything. Your slave masters manipulate your society relentlessly on both an individual and collective basis to worsen things, corrupt you, and hinder your progress at every turn because they enjoy exercising their power and see it as a reward and gain for them each time they find a new way to diminish you and bring punishment and suffering your way. So philosophical musings and sophistry become embarrassingly inappropriate when there is unawareness of these realities.
Wow, that last sentence is a beat down, I would say, but a very appropriate one.
Yeah, that's the ultimate wake up call, the
Yeah.
slap in the face.
When you live in a slave colony, that changes everything, Carl, quote unquote. Yeah,
Yep.
creator's not mincing words on that one. Not at all. U.S. creator, it seems the heart of corruption can sometimes be how something is used, rather than the material being corrupt in its own right. A chisel sitting in a toolbox is arguably not corrupt, but becomes corrupt when used as a screwdriver for a purpose it was not intended to fulfill. Yet, in an emergency, the rules can change. Can Creator share with us how empowered prayer, the Lightworker Healing Protocol, deep subconscious mind reset, and divine life support can help us use divine truth in a divinely aligned fashion while, at the same time, enabling us to be resourceful enough to make the best use of what we have when an emergency calls for it?
All right, and Creator says, we appreciate this question and perspective because it at once illustrates the problem and within it the solution you need to fully address your pursuit of truth here. All about your description is a reflection of the sorry state of human civilization and wherewithal, being so lacking of power and precision, so as to be weakened and in many cases, wholly useless in dealing with the many, many difficulties and problems humanity is facing. Because the interlopers are in charge, they are the driving force behind everything, good or bad. So it is their influence that must be reckoned with, not a better use of human level tools and choices and strategies. By all reasonable analysis, humans are failing at everything they take on. Even your seeming signs of progress, such as the many technologies of the modern era, are bringing about a diminishment because they are designed to disempower you and, in many cases, are hazardous to health. That is the cleverness of the interlopers as your opponents and would be destroyers. The sad reality is that humanity is ill equipped to stand up to such opposition. You simply do not have the wherewithal to even hold your own in a confrontation. So while there are many ways you could reconfigure society and its institutions to function more efficiently and effectively, that could only happen if the interlopers withdraw and with it stop interfering to hold you down and hold you back. Your channel and his compatriots at Get Wisdom are working with the divine realm to heal the interlopers themselves and encourage a withdrawal instead of them hastening the total annihilation of humanity. That will provide some breathing room to continue the healing and allow humans to progress, and for a grand ascension to take place, allowing humanity to leave the physical altogether and ascend to a higher plane of existence. That is your ultimate destiny and can only happen with enough healing to prepare humans to be ready, and in the process, create enough healing intention that it will allow the continued healing to eventually reach all within your galaxy and raise everything and everyone up to enable a return to the divine path at long last. This is why you were created and has finally been made possible through the advent of these healing protocols. Heretofore, any outreach to the divine has been at best a partial exercise launched under unfavorable circumstances and done from a position of weakness, as typically a humble supplicant living in fear and crying out in pain. What has been needed all along is more of a human divine partnership where humans being put in the position of being in charge of their world and having to be in the lead would know enough to summon divine help in an effective fashion. That knowledge has been lacking until now through corruption by the interlopers. An effective divine outreach through these healing protocols will save the day if enough of you answer the call and take up the challenge of becoming healers and champions of a restoration of belief in the reality of the divine.
That's really what it's all about at the end of the day. It's about being in charge of our own destiny in the sense that it is up to us to call in the divine to bring about the healing we need. Divine's not going to be coming in on its own. It needs our entreaty to make that happen, Carl.
Well, God's not going to let us out of here until we clean the mess up. So that's that's as stark as I can put it.
Yeah.
And it's quite a different perspective than the spiritual gurus out there are touting that we're just going to have this ascension and everything's going to work out and we can create what we want and all of these would be sugar coatings that are really a disempowerment. And we've got serious problems and serious work to do, but we've been shown the way. And this is it.
Yes, and the biggest disempowerment is this notion that just sit back and watch it happen. You know, it's essentially what the message is at the end of the day, and that's not the message we're giving. You can't just sit back and watch it happen. You have to make it happen, and you have to be involved, and you have to ask, put your launch your intention for all this healing to take place. That's what prayer is. At the end of the day, it's a shaping of human intention, but that intention has to be directed to the divine and for specific purposes with specific healing protocols to bring about the desired outcome. That's what Get Wisdom is all about. And we invite you to check out getwisdom.com and learn about all of our protocols, all of our services. We have the Divine Wisdom database with thousands of channelings. I don't know what that's up to now, Carl. I'm sure it's approaching
It's a scary
10,000.
number.
Yeah. So there's a lot to do. There's a lot to learn. And time is a waste, and you better get on with it. Check out getwisdom.com today. That's all we have for this month's Get Wisdom Live. Thanks, everybody.
Be well.